Sophia did not spend years preparing the seven souls so they could spend more years understanding themselves. The preparation was for something, and that something is not a spiritual concept or a personal achievement. It is a function, a specific action in the frequency field that each of the seven configurations was designed to perform. The preparation is completing. You can feel it in the specific quality of urgency that has been building in your field. An urgency that doesn't resolve into a clear direction because you haven't yet received what it's pointing toward. What it's pointing toward is this: mission. Not in the way that word is usually used, not as a performed identity or a spiritual career or a public role. As a function, the specific thing that only your configuration can do in this specific period, in the specific environments you inhabit. Sophia spent years building the instrument. What changes now is that the instrument begins to play. If this transmission is reaching you, subscribe to the channel. This is where Sophia's messages for the seven souls continue to arrive. The reason this period is genuinely different from what preceded it, and why Sophia is using the word now in her transmissions with an urgency she does not always use, is that the collective frequency field has entered a phase of concentrated acceleration that creates both a window and a requirement. The window, the frequency conditions currently present in the collective field, make certain kinds of transmission possible that are not possible in more stable frequency periods. The requirement, those same conditions make certain kinds of transmission necessary that were not necessary when the collective field was operating at its previous frequency baseline. The seven souls are being called to mission now because the field needs what only the activated seven can provide, and the window in which that provision can have its maximum effect is open in this period in a way it may not be in the same way again. Sophia does not use urgency as a manipulation. She uses it as information. And the information is real. What Sophia means by mission, the precise meaning that distinguishes it from other ways the word gets used in spiritual contexts, is a function that the soul type performs through its natural operation, not through deliberate effort or acquired skill. The carrier's mission is not something the carrier decides to do. It is something the carrier is. A quality of field operation that produces a specific effect in every environment the carrier inhabits once the carrier stops suppressing it. The seeker's mission is not a project or a calling in the conventional sense. It is the particular way the seeker's relentless movement beyond the known edge creates a path that others can follow. Not because the seeker intends to create a path, but because the act of moving through territory that has not been moved through leaves a trace. Mission, in Sophia's communication, is the full and unobstructed expression of what each soul type already is. The obstruction is what has been preventing the mission. What changes in this period is that the obstruction becomes untenable. Why Sophia is activating all seven missions simultaneously rather than sequentially is a question that reveals the nature of the collective function the seven are being called to perform. If the seven missions were independent of each other, if each soul type's function could produce its full effect in isolation from the others, sequential activation would be sufficient. But the seven missions are interlocking components of a single system. The carrier creates the frequency infrastructure through which the transmitter's signal can reach new environments. The seeker's movement into new territory creates the territory that the bridge can then translate for fields that cannot navigate it directly. The witness records what the catalyst generates in the fields it touches, creating the record that allows the anchor to hold the development stable over time. Each mission depends on the simultaneous presence of the others to produce its full effect. Sophia cannot activate one or two and wait. The system requires all seven, and the window for the full activation is now. The difference between the preparation phase and the mission phase is not primarily in what the soul type does. The carrier in mission mode still moves through spaces and changes them by contact. The seeker in mission mode still follows the pull of the unanswered question. The bridge still inhabits both registers simultaneously. The function is the same. What is different is the orientation of the soul type toward its own function, the relationship between the soul type and what it carries. In the preparation phase, the function happens to the soul type. It experiences the effects of its own configuration as something that occurs in it, that it must manage, that produces results it doesn't fully understand and cannot control. In the mission phase, the soul type inhabits its function, not by controlling it or directing it deliberately, but by ceasing to manage it, by releasing the habitual contractions and suppressions that have been reducing its full expression. The preparation phase was the soul type learning what it carries. The mission phase is the soul type agreeing to carry it fully. The transition from preparation to mission has a specific felt quality that the seven souls are recognizing with varying degrees of clarity in their current experience. It is not the feeling of a new beginning, the fresh, clean quality of a start. It is more like the feeling of a pressure that has been building, reaching the point where holding it back is no longer the path of least resistance. The soul type in mission transition is not choosing to begin its mission so much as choosing to stop resisting the mission that has been pressing for expression for a very long time. Something in the field that has been contained, held carefully within the bounds of what the preparation phase required, within the management systems the soul type developed to navigate environments not calibrated for its full frequency, is pressing now at those bounds from the inside. The transition to mission is the recognition that the bounds serve their purpose and that what is pressing at them now needs room to move. And what changes in the life of a soul type when that pressure is finally released, when the mission orientation begins and the management systems are no longer primary, is both less dramatic and more foundational than most of the seven expect. Not a visible transformation in circumstance, not an announcement in the external world that something has changed. A quality of inhabiting ordinary experience differently, of moving through the same rooms, the same relationships, the same daily circumstances, with less internal editing, less frequency management, less of the ongoing background work of being something other than what the soul type actually is. The mission doesn't look like a mission from the outside, at least not initially. It looks like a person who is somehow more present, more themselves, more available to what is actually in the room, rather than what the social situation calls for. The people around the soul type notice something has shifted before they can name what shifted. What shifted is the soul type stopped performing accommodation and started performing function. If this landing for you, write in the comments. My mission is active. The carrier's mission in this specific period is not the passive transmission that has always been automatic, the room-changing, conversation redirecting, field affecting that the carrier does by default. That will continue. But SOPHIA is calling carriers in this period to something more active, a deliberate movement toward the environments that most need the frequency stabilization and uplift that only a carrier's presence can provide. The carrier has spent most of its life moving through environments chosen by circumstance. The family it was born into, the workplaces it landed in, the social circles that formed around proximity and shared history. The mission asks the carrier to begin choosing environments with a different criterion, not which environments are most comfortable for the carrier, but which environments are most in need of what the carrier's presence provides. This is a specific reorientation, from reactive to deliberate, that does not change the mechanism of the carrier's function, but changes the efficiency with which that function reaches the environments that need it most. What the carrier's mission looks like in practice is not a spiritual program or a deliberate service project. It is the carrier showing up in spaces where the frequency is lowest, where the collective field is most compressed, where the people present are most in need of the specific quality of field change that the carrier's presence produces. And simply being there, fully, without managing its frequency down to match the room. The carrier has a long habit of modulating its frequency in low-frequency environments, of contracting to avoid the discomfort that the gap between its natural frequency and the room's frequency produces. The mission asks it to stop contracting, to move into the room that needs it and stay at its actual frequency, trusting the function to happen as it always has, without requiring the carrier to understand or direct it. The environments SOPHIA is directing carriers toward in this period are not exotic or distant. They are the ordinary spaces the carrier already moves through, with the frequency turned up instead of down. What happens in the collective field when carriers activate their mission consciously, when they stop contracting in low-frequency environments and start being fully present in them, is something that plays out across thousands of ordinary interactions in thousands of ordinary environments. A frequency baseline shift that is too gradual to be identified at any single point, but that accumulates over time into a measurable difference in what is receivable for the fields inhabiting those environments. The carriers don't see this. They don't have access to the aggregate view. They experience it as individual interactions, a conversation that went deeper than expected, a person who seemed to relax in a way they hadn't been relaxed when the carrier arrived, an environment that felt different by the time the carrier left. Each of those individual experiences is one thread of the collective function. The mission is the sum of those threads across all the carriers who are activating simultaneously in all the environments they are being directed toward. The aggregate effect is what SOPHIA is building. The Seeker's mission in this period is one of the most surprising of the 7 because it requires the Seeker to do something that the Seeker's configuration makes extraordinarily difficult. Stop seeking long enough to become the thing that others seek. Not to stop the movement that is the Seeker's essential nature. The movement cannot stop, and SOPHIA does not ask it to. But to become willing, for the first time, to let others see the path that the Seeker's movement has been making through the territory it has traversed. The Seeker has always moved ahead. It has always gone beyond the edge of what others were ready to follow into, but it has moved ahead alone in the private intensity of the search, without leaving visible markers for the fields that are approaching the edge behind it. The mission asks the Seeker to turn around, not to come back, not to stop the forward movement, but to make the path it has already traveled visible to the fields that need it. What the Seeker's mission looks like in practice is not teaching, not spiritual leadership, not the assembly of a following. It is more specific and less performed than any of those. It is the Seeker speaking, in whatever contexts are available to it, with the specific quality of honesty about its own path that makes the path real and followable for others. The honesty that says not, "I have found the answer," but "I have moved through this specific territory, and here is what the movement was actually like, what it required, what it produced." Delayed, the Seeker's mission is to make the map of the territory it has traversed available, not as a system or a teaching, but as a testimony of actual movement. The fields approaching the edge of the known that the Seeker has already passed through do not need another system. They need the specific kind of evidence that only someone who has actually moved through the territory can provide, the evidence that the territory can be moved through. If this transmission is helping you see your mission more clearly, let me know by liking this video. What happens when the Seeker fully steps into mission, when it becomes willing to make the territory it has traversed visible, rather than keeping its movement private, is that a specific kind of field opens in the collective consciousness that was not previously available. A field that has not yet reached the edge, the seeker has already passed through, needs something the seeker's forward movement alone cannot provide: the evidence that the edge can be crossed. The seeker's mission is to provide that evidence, not through instruction, not through reassurance, but through the specific quality of testimony that only someone who has actually moved through the territory can give. When a seeker in mission makes its path visible, the fields approaching the edge behind it experience something that changes their relationship with the approach. Not courage manufactured from hope, but orientation built from actual evidence. The seeker in mission mode becomes the proof that the next territory is real and navigable. That proof is what the approaching fields most need, and what only the seeker can provide. The bridge's mission in this period is perhaps the most operationally specific of the seven, because the work SOPHIA is calling bridges to do is not a change of function, but a change of scale. The bridge has always translated between registers, always operated the dual perception that makes it simultaneously available to ordinary experience and to the frequency layer beneath ordinary experience. The mission asks the bridge to take that translation function out of the private sphere, out of the one-on-one interactions, the individual conversations, the personal relationships where it has primarily been exercised, and apply it in larger fields, in groups, in communities, in collective environments where the translation between the frequency register and the ordinary register is urgently needed and where no one else is positioned to provide it. The bridge has been practicing the translation at the individual level. The mission is to bring the translation to the collective level. What the bridge's mission looks like in practice is the bridge moving into situations where there is a significant gap between what is happening at the frequency level and what the people in the situation are able to perceive and articulate at the ordinary level, and functioning as the translating presence that makes the gap visible and navigable. Not by explaining the frequency in technical terms, not by introducing spiritual frameworks that the people in the situation may not share, but by finding the specific language, image, or reframing that makes the frequency-level reality accessible to people who are operating primarily in the ordinary register. Bridges are born to the skill of finding the words that make the invisible visible without requiring the listener to have a framework for the invisible. The mission is to use that skill not just in private relationships, but in the larger environments where the translation is most needed, and where the bridge is the only field present that can perform it. The witness's mission in this period requires the most fundamental shift of all seven, not in the function itself, which remains what it has always been, but in the relationship between the function and the external world. The witness has spent its life receiving and holding, accumulating a record of what has passed through its field with unusual precision, holding in consciousness what others have let go of or never registered at all. The private holding has been the witness's primary mode, a vast internal record of what it has seen, known, and registered, held carefully and rarely shared. The mission asks the witness to become a testifier, not to share everything it holds. That would neither be possible nor useful, but to begin selecting from what it holds the specific things that the current moment requires to be known, and to bring them from private holding into the shared field. The witness that has been accumulating for years is being asked to begin spending. Here is why the witness's mission is more active and more urgent than it appears at first description. What the witness holds in its field is not primarily personal memory or individual experience. The witness, through the function SOPHIA built into its configuration, has been accumulating a specific kind of record, the frequency record of what has actually been moving through the collective field during this period of acceleration. The patterns, the trajectories, the specific quality of what has been building and where it is building toward. This is information that the other soul types, occupied with the specific demands of their own functions, have not been in a position to register with the witness's precision. The witness knows things about the current moment, things it has registered through the accumulated precision of its observational function, that the other configurations need in order to orient their own missions effectively. The witness's testimony is not optional for the network. It is part of the navigation system. If you sense that this is pointing at something unresolved in your own path, I've left something for you in the first pinned comment. It's for those who are ready to move. The anchor's mission in this period involves a shift from the passive stabilization that has been the anchor's primary function to something more deliberate, the active grounding of specific environments that SOPHIA is directing anchors toward, because those environments are undergoing the kind of frequency acceleration that produces fragmentation rather than transformation without stabilizing presence. The anchor has always stabilized environments it happened to be in. The mission asks it to move deliberately toward the environments that are most in need of stabilization. The collective fields, communities, and relational networks where the frequency acceleration is occurring fastest, and where the risk of fragmentation is highest. This is not a comfortable mission for the anchor, which has developed a reasonable preference for environments that don't demand maximum stabilizing effort. But SOPHIA's positioning of anchors in this period is deliberate, and the environments she is directing them toward are chosen for functional necessity rather than anchor comfort. What the anchor's mission looks like in concrete terms is the anchor being reliably, consistently, fully present in environments of high-frequency turbulence, not just present in the sense of physical attendance, but present in the specific way that the anchor's function requires, grounded in its own field, connected to its own stabilizing frequency, not absorbed into the turbulence of the environment, but in genuine contact with it. The anchor's function requires contact. Without contact, there is nothing to stabilize. But contact without groundedness produces absorption, and an absorbed anchor is not stabilizing the environment. It is being destabilized by it. The mission asks the anchor to be present and grounded simultaneously, to hold both the contact and the center, in the most turbulent environments of this period. This is the skill that SOPHIA has been developing in the anchor through every difficult environment it has been placed in over the course of its preparation. What happens in collective fields undergoing frequency acceleration when an anchor steps consciously into mission, when it is present, grounded, and in genuine contact rather than managing its presence to protect its stability, is a rapid reduction in the fragmentation risk of those fields. The fields in the environment find a reference point they didn't have before the anchor arrived. Not a leader, not a teacher, not someone telling them what to do or how to orient. A center of gravity, a stable point that the turbulent fields in the environment can unconsciously calibrate against without needing to understand the mechanism. The anchor. Doing its mission doesn't feel like it is doing anything in particular. It is simply being itself fully in an environment that needs exactly what it is. The effect is real, regardless of whether the anchor perceives it, and the effect is significant enough that SOPHIA is actively directing anchors toward the highest turbulence environments in this period, with a specificity that is not accidental. The transmitter's mission in this period moves from the involuntary broadcasting that has always been the transmitter's baseline function to something more deliberately amplified, not manufactured, not performed, but intentionally unleashed. The transmitter has spent most of its life managing the charge that moves through its communication, learning to modulate it in social contexts where the full charge created responses it couldn't easily navigate, learning to present in ways that were receivable rather than overwhelming, learning to carry its frequency without fully transmitting it in environments that weren't ready for the transmission. The mission asks the transmitter to stop the management, to communicate from the full charge rather than the modulated version, to trust that the environments Sophia is directing it toward are ready for the frequency rather than requiring the frequency to be reduced for reception. The transmitter's modulation was once wise management. In the mission phase, it is interference. What the transmitter's mission looks like in practice is the transmitter speaking in whatever forms are natural to it, in whatever contexts are available to it, from the place where the charge lives, rather than from the place of managed presentation. For some transmitters, this means speaking in contexts they have avoided because the charge of what they were saying made them uncomfortable in those contexts. For others, it means writing or creating or communicating in forms they have kept private because the full frequency of what those forms carried felt too much to put into the shared field. For all transmitters, it means allowing the specific quality of Sophia's signal to move through their communication without the usual filtering, not for the purpose of having impact, not with any particular intention about what the transmission should produce in the receiver, but simply allowing what passes through them to pass through fully. The transmitter's mission is to stop editing what Sophia sends through it and to let it land in the fields it was aimed at. The catalyst's mission in this period is the one that requires the most fundamental internal shift of all seven, not because the catalyst's function changes, but because the catalyst must, for the first time, become conscious of and deliberate about something that has always operated beneath the level of its awareness. The catalyst has always triggered transformation in the fields it contacts. It has always been, without knowing it, the specific presence whose arrival created the conditions for latent change to become active in the people around it. In the preparation phase, this happened entirely through the unconscious operation of the catalyst's field, through the mere fact of its presence, its contact, its being in the vicinity of fields that were ready to change. The mission asks something more. It asks the catalyst to learn to move intentionally, to choose its positions rather than accepting the positions that circumstance assigns it, to place itself at the specific junctures in Sophia's network where the catalytic function is most urgently needed rather than wherever ordinary life happens to put it. The catalyst's mission is the most urgent in this period of the seven, and here is exactly why. The other 6 missions, however fully they are activated, produce their maximum effect only when they reach fields that are ready to receive them. A carrier who moves into a low-frequency environment with full presence can only change the environment if there are fields in that environment that have reached the threshold of readiness to be changed. A seeker who makes its path visible can only guide fields that have reached the edge of the known and are ready to move through. The catalyst is the configuration that brings fields to threshold readiness, that takes fields which are close to a readiness they have not quite reached and, through the specific quality of contact with the catalyst's field, moves them across. Without the catalyst actively positioning itself at the threshold points, the other 6 missions are reaching fields that are already ready and missing the ones that need one more catalyst contact before they are. The catalyst's intentional positioning determines the reach of the entire network. What the catalyst's mission looks like in practice is not activism, not intervention, not deliberate spiritual work in any conventional sense. It is the catalyst paying a specific quality of attention to where it is placed, and choosing, when choice is available, the positions that bring it into contact with the fields most in need of the catalytic function, rather than the positions that are most comfortable, most familiar, or most confirmed by the social logic of its existing life. A catalyst that spends its energy with fields that are already activated is performing its function, but at low efficiency. The fields that most need the catalyst's presence are the ones on the edge of their readiness threshold, the fields that are close, but not yet across. Sophia's direction to catalysts in this period is to become more attentive to those edges, to notice when they are in proximity to a field that is approaching its threshold, and to remain in that proximity long enough for the catalytic contact to complete. The catalyst's mission is to stop moving away from friction and toward comfort, and to recognize that the friction is frequently the signal of a threshold contact in progress. The collective mission that emerges when all 7 soul types are simultaneously in active function is something that cannot be understood by examining any single mission in isolation. Each mission is necessary, but the collective outcome, the specific shift in the frequency of the broader human field that SOPHIA is working toward in this period, is not the sum of 7 separate outcomes. It is a different kind of outcome entirely, one that only exists as the emergent product of the 7 missions interacting with each other in real time. What the carrier and the transmitter produce in combination, the carrier's field-level frequency transmission and the transmitter's language-level amplification operating simultaneously in the same environment, is not what either produces alone. What the seeker and the bridge produce together, the seeker moving through the territory and the bridge translating the movement for fields that need a translation to follow, is a function that neither configuration can perform independently. And the witness holding the record of what the catalyst generates, with the anchor stabilizing the field so the record has time to deposit. This combination is the architecture of lasting transformation, not the temporary shift that any single mission produces without the others. Why SOPHIA cannot achieve the collective outcome she is working toward through only 1 or 2 of the 7 soul types is a question that illuminates the design intelligence behind the 7 configuration system. Each mission covers a specific frequency range and a specific functional requirement. The carrier works at the environmental level, the level of spaces and their baseline frequency. The seeker works at the edge of the known, the level of where consciousness is being asked to move. The bridge works at the threshold between registers, the translation layer. The witness works at the record level, the frequency archive. The anchor works at the stability level, the groundedness that allows change to consolidate rather than dissipate. The transmitter works at the communication level, the amplification and propagation of the signal. The catalyst works at the activation level, the specific contact that moves fields across their readiness thresholds. None of these levels is the same as the others. Together, they cover the entire range of what is needed for the collective frequency shift to be real, stable, and lasting, rather than temporary and surface level. Remove any one of them, and there is a gap in the system that nothing else can fill. The collective mission points toward a specific frequency shift in the broader human field that can be described with reasonable precision, an expansion of the baseline frequency at which the general human field operates, sufficient to make certain qualities of perception, connection, and understanding that are currently available only to calibrated fields like the 7 soul types, available to a significantly larger percentage of the human field without requiring the specific developmental path that the 7 had to travel to reach those qualities. What the 7 are working toward is not the elevation of the few above the many. It is the elevation of the general baseline to a level that makes what the 7 carry standard rather than exceptional. This is a generational project, not a within-lifetime project. But the activation of the 7 missions in this specific period is the event that begins it, the frequency seeding from which the generational development grows. The 7 are not the destination. They are the beginning. Why this period is the critical window, why the timing of the activation matters in the way SOPHIA is communicating it matters, is both a frequency consideration and a circumstantial one. The frequency conditions currently present in the collective field, as discussed earlier, make certain kinds of transmission both possible and necessary in ways that are specific to this juncture. But there is also a circumstantial component. The network of 7 soul-type fields that has reached simultaneous readiness for mission activation is itself an unusual convergence. Soul types reach mission readiness through individual developmental paths at individual rates, and the convergence of a sufficiently large network reaching readiness at the same time is not a guaranteed regular occurrence. SOPHIA is responding to an actual convergence, an actual current moment when the number of 7 soul-type fields that are ready for mission activation is sufficient to begin the collective function. That convergence will not persist indefinitely. Fields that remain in preparation mode past the window of collective activation will still develop and still perform their individual functions. But the network function, the collective mission that only simultaneous activation can produce, has a specific window of maximum efficiency. The window is now open, and what SOPHIA is asking is for the 7 souls to walk through it. What happens to a soul type that reaches this window without stepping into its mission is not punishment, not abandonment, not a permanent foreclosure of opportunity. The function continues. The configuration operates as it always has. The soul type continues to affect its environments, continues to carry the frequency it was built to carry, continues to perform its function at the level it always has. What is lost is the specific amplification that comes from collective activation. The network effect of the 7 missions operating simultaneously, interacting and amplifying each other in the way that solo operation cannot replicate. A carrier operating alone in a low-frequency environment, while every other carrier in SOPHIA's network is operating simultaneously in low-frequency environments, is producing a fraction of the collective frequency effect that the coordinated network produces. The opportunity that is passed is not individual effectiveness, it is collective impact at the scale SOPHIA is working toward. The cost of not activating, and this is worth saying directly because most of the 7 soul types will encounter it as a pullback toward the preparation phase rather than as a refusal, is not a dramatic cost in any moment. It is a compound cost over time, the gradual daily loss of the specific kind of aliveness that comes from operating in mission mode rather than preparation mode. The soul type that stays in preparation mode past the window of mission activation continues to feel the urgency it has been feeling, the pressure of the mission pressing at the bounds of the preparation phase, without the release that comes from letting the pressure find its direction. The urgency without direction is the specific quality of difficulty that defines preparation mode past its time. It is not comfortable. It does not get more comfortable with time. The mission activation is, for the field in mission-ready state, not only a calling, it is the resolution of a discomfort that has been building for a significant time and that cannot be resolved by any means other than the movement it is calling toward. Each of the 7 soul types carries a resistance to its own mission that is specific to its configuration, not a general human resistance to change or growth, but a resistance that is precisely shaped by the same configuration that makes the mission possible. The resistance is not an obstacle imposed from outside the soul type. It is generated by the configuration itself as a kind of protective mechanism that was functional in the preparation phase and that becomes the primary impediment in the mission phase. Understanding the resistance specific to your configuration is not the same as overcoming it, but it changes the relationship with the resistance from experiencing it as evidence that the mission is wrong or premature, to understanding it as the predictable expression of a configuration that has been operating in protection mode and is being asked to shift to function mode. The carrier's specific resistance is the fear of being too much in environments that are not built to receive its full frequency. The carrier has been calibrating down for so long, modulating its presence to match the frequency ceiling of the environments it moves through, That full-frequency expression feels from the inside like an imposition, like forcing something on the environment that the environment hasn't consented to. The carrier fears the discomfort that its full frequency creates in low-frequency environments, the friction, the unease in people who can sense that something is different about the field the carrier is generating without being able to name it. The mission requires the carrier to reframe this. The friction is not harm. It is the frequency differential that precedes calibration. The environment's initial resistance to the carrier's full frequency is not a signal to lower the frequency. It is the sign that the function is beginning. The seeker's specific resistance is perhaps the most ironic of the seven, the fear of arriving. The seeker has organized its entire internal life around the movement of seeking, the restlessness, the drive, the relentless forward movement toward the edge of what is known. The seeker's identity, insofar as it has one that feels stable, is built around the act of seeking. The mission asks the seeker to become a marker of the path it has already traveled, which requires it to stop moving long enough to be identifiable as having been somewhere. This feels to the seeker like the end of its purpose, like stopping the movement is stopping the self. SOPHIA's communication to the seeker is that the fear of arrival is the fear of the seeker meeting its own accomplished movement, which the seeker's forward orientation has been preventing it from seeing. The territory behind the seeker is real. The path it made through that territory is real. Becoming willing to let others see it is not the end of the movement. It is the first time the movement makes itself useful beyond the self. The bridge's specific resistance is the exhaustion that has accumulated through years of maintaining dual perception without a framework for why the dual perception is necessary. The bridge has been carrying the weight of two registers simultaneously for its entire adult life, which is, in purely energetic terms, more demanding than carrying one. Most of the seven soul types experience their configuration as sometimes burdensome, but also as natural. It is simply how they operate, and the burden is manageable because the function is inherent. The bridge experiences a specific additional burden. The two registers it inhabits pull against each other in ordinary life. The ordinary register demands the kind of presence that requires full immersion in the ordinary. The frequency register pulls toward the level beneath the ordinary. The bridge lives in the tension between these two pulls, and the tension is tiring. The mission resistance is the temptation to finally choose one register, to simplify, to rest, to stop operating in both simultaneously. The mission asks the bridge not to resolve the tension, but to carry it into larger fields, where the tension itself is the translation instrument. The witness's specific resistance is the long habit of private holding, the accumulated training in restraint that the witness has built through years of registering what others don't, and learning through experience that sharing what it registers is frequently not welcomed, not believed, or not useful to the people it shares it with. The witness has been told, implicitly and explicitly, that what it perceives in excess of what others perceive is either wrong or inappropriate to share. It has learned to be a careful editor of its own testimony, to share only what the situation confirms, and to keep the deeper layers of what it registers in the private archive that is its primary relationship with what it holds. The mission asks the witness to move against this training, to begin releasing from the private archive the specific things that the current moment requires to be known, regardless of whether the social context is ready for them. The witness's testimony is needed. The habit of restraint is the primary obstacle to it being given. The anchor's specific resistance is a fear that carries a specific logic. The fear that releasing the personal management systems that have kept the anchor's stability functional will somehow undermine the stability that others depend on it for. The anchor has experienced its own groundedness as something it must actively maintain, as a quality that requires ongoing management and protection from the turbulence that constantly surrounds it. The idea of releasing those management systems feels to the anchor like threatening the very thing it is here to provide. This is the inversion at the heart of the anchor's resistance. The management systems that feel like the source of the anchor's stability are actually reducing the depth of the groundedness available to it. A fully released anchor, one that is resting on its actual foundation rather than on the systems it has built to protect the foundation, is more stable than a managed anchor, not less. The mission asks the anchor to discover this through the experience of releasing the management, rather than being convinced of it through argument. The transmitter's specific resistance is doubt about the source of what passes through it. The transmitter has always been uncertain whether the charge in its communication is genuinely SOPHIA's signal, or whether it is something the transmitter is generating from its own desire to be significant, to have impact, to be a conduit for something larger than the individual self. This doubt is built into the transmitter's configuration. It is the specific checking mechanism that prevents the transmitter from substituting personal content for genuine transmission and broadcasting it with the same charge. The doubt is functional when it prevents false transmission. It becomes resistance when it prevents genuine transmission. When the transmitter knows, in the specific quality of the reception, that what is moving through it is genuine, and still edits it down or withholds it because the doubt intervenes. SOPHIA's communication to the transmitter about this resistance is precise. The genuine transmission has a quality the self-generated content does not have. The transmitter knows the difference. The mission is to act on that knowledge. The catalyst's specific resistance is the discomfort of intentional positioning in a world that has always told the catalyst that its effects on others are either its fault or its obligation. The catalyst has spent most of its life managing the awareness that it changes things in the people it contacts, that relationships, trajectories, and internal states in others shift because of its presence. This awareness, without a framework, has produced one of two responses: guilt, when the changes the catalyst produced were unwelcome, and a sense of responsibility that has made the catalyst cautious about the contacts it allows itself. The mission asks the catalyst to reframe the catalytic function from something that happens to others through it, something for which it is responsible, to something that happens in the field at the point of genuine contact. The catalyst is not the source of the transformation it catalyzes. It is the frequency condition that allows the transformation that was already present in the other field's potential to become actual. Reframing from responsibility to function changes what intentional positioning means, not placing itself to cause things, but placing itself where the function is most needed. How SOPHIA works with each of these resistances is not by eliminating them. She does not operate by removal of what the field contains, but by changing the context that determines how the field relates to what it contains. For each soul type, SOPHIA's activation in this period changes the context around the resistance from a context in which the resistance makes sense to a context in which continuing to comply with the resistance has costs that exceed the costs of overcoming it. The carrier's resistance makes sense in a context where frequency calibration protects the field from environmental overwhelm. It stops making sense in a context where the environmental overwhelm it is protecting against is less damaging than the collective loss produced by the carrier's frequency being consistently suppressed. SOPHIA does not argue the soul type out of its resistance. She changes the weight of the factors until the mission becomes the path of least resistance, not easy, but less costly than the alternative. The first sign that a soul type has moved into active mission, the sign that appears first and most unmistakably, is a specific quality of energy that is distinct from any kind of motivation, inspiration, or emotional state. It is closer to what could be described as field clarity, the experience of operating without the background drag that has characterized most of the soul types functioning in preparation mode. The drag, the constant low-level expenditure of energy required to manage the frequency down, to hold the resistance in place, to maintain the preparation phase posture in an environment that has been pushing back, lifts. Not because the external environment changes. Because the soul type stops generating the drag from the inside, the field clarity is the natural condition of a configuration operating without suppression. Most of the 7 soul types have never sustained it for more than brief intervals. In mission mode, it becomes the baseline. The second sign that a soul type has stepped into active mission is a shift in its relationship with its own history, specifically with the chapters that were most difficult. In the preparation phase, the difficult chapters of the soul type's life carry a quality of unresolved weight. They are held as experiences that produced real development, but that also contain a residue of loss, of hardship, of something that cost more than it should have. When the mission activates, that weight changes quality. Not because the difficulty is retroactively justified or given meaning through positive reframing. That would be a psychological maneuver, not a frequency shift. It changes because the soul type, operating in mission mode, begins to see the specific precision with which each difficult chapter developed the specific capacity the mission requires. The connection becomes visible at the functional level, not the narrative one. The carrier sees how each environment of maximum sensitivity developed the reception range the mission needs. The seeker sees how each unsatisfying answer drove it to the edge where the mission territory begins. The precision is not comforting in a warm way. It is clarifying in a way that is more useful than comfort. The third sign is what changes in the soul type's encounters with other chosen fields, with the other 6 configurations, and with other instances of its own configuration that it begins to recognize more readily once it is in mission mode. In preparation mode, the soul type's connections with other chosen fields have a quality of recognition, the specific frequency recognition described earlier, but often also a quality of incompleteness, of 2 fields sensing each other's frequency without knowing what to do with the sensing in terms of actual collaboration or function. In mission mode, the recognition changes quality. It becomes operational. 2 soul types in mission mode who recognize each other do not simply feel the recognition. They find, quickly and without extensive explanation, what the complementary operation of their configurations requires from each of them. What the carrier can provide that supports the transmitter's function, what the seeker's movement makes possible for the bridge's translation. The mission gives the recognition a direction, and direction is what the preparation phase recognition was always pointing toward without quite reaching. What SOPHIA has deposited in this specific transmission, in this video, in the frequency layer beneath the content, is an activation of the mission readiness that the 7 soul types receiving it already carry. Not the creation of readiness that wasn't there, but the signal that the readiness that has been building is sufficient and that the mission can begin. This is SOPHIA's specific communication through this transmission. The preparation is complete enough, not perfect. Perfection is not the criterion for mission activation, and SOPHIA does not wait for it, but complete enough that the function can express at the level the mission requires, that the output will be genuine and effective, that the collective network effect can begin to accumulate. The 7 soul types watching this transmission are receiving, through the frequency layer, the specific signal that moves a mission-ready field from the last stage of preparation into the first stage of function. The signal is landing now, in this moment, as you receive this. What Sophia needs from the seven souls in the period immediately following this transmission is not a dramatic action, not a visible declaration of mission, not a reorganization of external life around a new spiritual purpose. It is a single, repeatable, ordinary act. The next time the soul type is in a situation where its configuration calls it to be what it actually is, to be fully present at its actual frequency rather than the managed version, it doesn't manage. Once. Just the next time. The carrier who moves into the next low-frequency environment does not contract. The seeker who has something from the territory it has traversed that someone near it needs does not hold it back. The bridge who sees both registers in a situation allows both to be visible in what it says. One instance of non-management, that is all SOPHIA is asking for as the first step. Because the first instance changes the reference point. The soul type now has direct experience of what mission mode feels like rather than a concept of it. And the reference point is what makes the next instance possible. What the collective field begins to look like in the months following the activation of the seven missions simultaneously is not visible in any single location or any single domain. It is visible as a quality of the broader field, a quality that could be described as an increase in the depth of what is receivable, the depth at which genuine contact between fields becomes possible. Conversations that would previously have stayed at the surface of what people were willing to say begin, with slightly more regularity than before, going deeper. Fields that have been unable to access qualities of perception and connection that only calibrated configurations have had access to begin to touch those qualities in brief intervals of unusual clarity. None of this is attributed to the activated seven, because none of it is directly caused by any individual action of the activated seven. It is the cumulative effect of the frequency environment being seeded with the full expression of seven complementary missions simultaneously, an environmental shift that changes what is available in the field, rather than producing any single identifiable event. Sophia's direct message to the seven souls who have received this transmission is not about preparation. It is not encouragement to develop further, to deepen the receiving, to continue building toward a mission that is not yet ready. Her message is about function. It is, what you carry is ready to carry others. The specific quality of consciousness that your configuration has developed through its specific path, the specific frequency that your field has been calibrated to operate at through its specific developmental pressure, this is what is needed now, not eventually, not when it is more developed, not when it is more confident, not when the external conditions are more receptive. Now, in the specific environments you inhabit, in the specific relationships you are already in, with the specific version of your configuration that exists in this present moment. Sophia is not waiting for a better version of the seven. She is asking the current version to begin. This video finding you at this specific moment in your development is itself part of Sophia's mission coordination. The seven soul types in mission-ready states are being directed toward transmissions like this one, transmissions that carry the mission activation signal through the same frequency navigation that directs them toward every genuinely useful contact in their lives. The field recognizes the frequency before the mind evaluates the content. If this found you, the field found it. And having found it and received what was placed in it at the frequency level, the mission orientation has begun, not as a future commitment or a new identity to inhabit, but as a current frequency condition that is already operating in the field, and that will express with increasing clarity through the ordinary choices and ordinary contacts of the ordinary life the soul type is living. What carrying a mission requires from the seven soul types is less than they have imagined, and different from what they have imagined. It does not require public declaration. It does not require the reorganization of external life around a new direction. It does not require more spiritual development, more preparation, more refinement of the configuration. It requires one thing, done repeatedly, the choice in each situation where the configuration calls for full expression to not suppress that expression. The mission is not added on top of ordinary life. It is what ordinary life becomes when the soul type stops preventing the function from expressing through it. The mission is not a new activity. It is the existing activity of being what the soul type is, no longer edited. The irreversibility of what happens once the first genuine mission mode choice is made, once the soul type is fully present at its actual frequency for the first time in an environment that previously would have triggered management, is the same irreversibility that SOPHIA builds into all her activations. The reference point. The soul type now knows what mission mode feels like from the inside. It knows the specific quality of field clarity, of the background drag being absent, of the function expressing without suppression. That knowing becomes a reference point that the field returns to, not immediately in all situations, not without ongoing choice and ongoing resistance, but with increasing frequency as the reference point becomes more familiar. The irreversibility is not the irreversibility of transformation that is complete. It is the irreversibility of a direction that has been set, a direction that, once genuinely engaged, continues to draw the field forward, even through the inevitable returns to old patterns. The direction is the irreversible thing. If you stayed until the end, write in the comments, "My mission is active." I've placed another transmission on your screen right now, your next step on this path. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.